So tell me, stranger, have you ever wondered about the details of game development? Sure, you probably already know that there's coding done to make Mario jump, or long hours spent in 3D modeling software meticulously crafting the likes of Ellie or Senua. See, I think it's safe to say most enjoyers of video games broadly know how a video game comes together, but have you ever wanted to dig deeper than that? Really get into the nitty-gritty of game development? Does the idea of someone explaining why they made the coding decisions they did in order to make the game that they want sound fascinating to you? Well then, my fellow psycho, take a seat and get comfortable. You're in the right place. Welcome to this thing. I don't have a name yet. But I suppose it's pretty hard to dig deep without first knowing where we're digging. Let me bring you up to speed on what I'm doing here, and then I'll give you that promised look behind the curtain. I am making a psychological horror game where you journey through the main character's nightmares, reliving twisted versions of their life story while strange creatures representing things in the main character's life stalks the dream halls of their subconscious imaginations. I'm calling this game What Hides in Dreams, and the twist is that death leaves scars. In other words, dying by the hands of the spooky monster affects the game's narrative. You don't get sent back to the last checkpoint and then told to try it again. You died, and you have to live with that failure. The game will just simply continue on, but death leaving scars need not just apply to the player. You can turn things around and kill the monster yourself, which represents its own consequences, or you can do nothing and just escape the nightmare and into the next, which has its own implications. So that's the game's main hook, but I do have a few other things to further set What Hides in Dreams apart from other horror games like it. In particular, I've made it a point to give every monster some unique gimmick so that no two monsters are exactly the same. Some examples include a monster that always knows where you are and steadily makes her way towards your position, or another that has no eyesight of its own and terrible hearing, but moves incredibly quickly, and walking into these Eye of Sauron-like objects instantly tells the monster where you are. In addition, I'm trying to lean hard into a dreamlike atmosphere, which not only helps justify the game progressing onwards despite player deaths, but also gives me a license to basically do whatever I feel like in terms of environments and monster designs. Objects don't have to obey the laws of physics in Dreamland after all. If I want that bathtub climbing up the wall, then by God I will have it. The concept of death in video games is one that's intrigued me for a long time. Modern game design seems to just take death and restarting from some previous point as a given. That's just how games work, don't you know? And there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but I do think the medium could stand to further explore the consequences of player failure. Horror games especially have a weird relationship with death because the threat of death is typically a big part of how you build fear and suspense. So when a player dies and just respawns like nothing happened, well, that pretty quickly deflates a lot of future tension. At least for me it does. In worst-case scenarios, a horror game might kill a player so frequently that it becomes frustrating as opposed to scary. Now, constant death can be a buzzkill in any game, sure, but it's especially devastating to horror. It's why I personally believe that most horror games should actively avoid player death as much as possible. So, now that you have an idea of what I'm doing and why, let's have a look at the project so far, shall we? I'm opting to use Unreal Engine 5 for this game, mainly because I'm just more familiar with that engine, and last year Unity did make everyone, including myself, very upset with its runtime fee. They've since walked that back, but by that point I was already knee-deep into this project on Unreal Engine, and there's nothing worse than redoing all of your previous work. Bear in mind that all game engines are different, so what I show you with Unreal Engine may not necessarily apply to the likes of Unity, Godot, or GameMaker. Right from the start, you'll notice the viewport, which lets you explore the current map, a content browser where all the assets are kept, a details panel that lets you edit things like position, and an object creation window for placing down new stuff, usually trigger volumes or basic geometry. This screen you're seeing is what I personally like to think of as my level editing screen, where I place objects in the game world, build out levels, and test things out. Unreal Engine has a lot of tools for game making, so much so that you pretty much have to be a AAA developer making a high-budget game in order to reasonably utilize everything. Its big claim to fame are the blueprints, a visual scripting system that allows you to do, well, almost anything. Need a new enemy type? That's a blueprint. Want to make a door you open and close? That's also a blueprint. A friendly cube with a cute face that hovers by your head and whispers sweet nothings into your ear? That's a blueprint. And maybe psychosis. A big part of what makes this feature so potent is the blueprint visual scripting system, where you connect various nodes together to create game logic. Now, I'm not usually the type to like visual scripting. They're often limiting and messy to use. I prefer to write lines of code in a text editor where I can, like a nerd. But some amount of blueprint coding is inevitable in an Unreal project, and thankfully the system is quite powerful. It's so powerful, in fact, that my last game was done entirely in blueprints. So it is possible to make whole games like this, though you best be prepared to wade through a mess of colored lines and nodes as your project grows more complex. This time around, I'm trying to integrate more C++ into the code, partially because it feels better to type out what I want, and, well, I have a degree in software development. It feels weird to not use C++. As for other tools helping me out, well, there's several, which we'll simply have to cover as we go, but I want to put a spotlight on Horror Engine, a starter project you can use to build horror games. It comes with a pre-made player character, physics system, inventory system with lots of different items to pick up, media streaming, puzzle makers, list goes on. After being completely, insanely free for a long time, the creator recently started selling it on Unreal's marketplace for $5, which is still quite a bargain considering what you get out of it. And they're not paying me to say this, by the way, I just like it. The paid version will have the newest features, but I started on What Hides in Dreams when Horror Engine was still completely free, and I anticipate that I will be sticking with my current version for this game. The primary feature is the Horror Event System, a system that allows you to trigger spooky scenes under any number of situations. The tech demo which you can play on Steam is a good showcase of this system in action, but to give a few examples of what you can do, you can make an object appear or disappear if you stare at it, trigger noises and cause chaos when, say, you turn on a radio, and of course spawn in objects and entire levels when entering a room. The only significant thing Horror Engine does not do is create enemy AI for you, which is just as well for me since I'd probably make my own anyway. It's also tailored towards first-person games, so anyone wanting to use it for a game with a different camera perspective will have to put in some time and effort to get that working. Honestly, with everything Horror Engine offers out of the box, I can picture someone recreating something like PT or Outlast fairly easily. That's how powerful it is. So of course, this helped me get a head start on the development of What Hides in Dreams. I simply created a Horror Engine project, modified settings and assets to suit my game, and already I have a significant part of the game developed. And there's no doubt I'll continue to be heavily relying on Horror Engine's capabilities throughout development, so I'll definitely try to showcase its functions as I go. We'll probably be seeing all these things a lot as development progresses, so you best get used to them now. This is just an introduction video, so we'll have to save the fine details of everything for when they're needed, but for the present moment, you've at least gotten a quick look at what game is being made, and a peek at a few of the tools being used to put it together. The systems and basic gameplay are all in place, so for the past few months, I've been putting together the game's content. I've got a couple playable levels, monsters and all, and am midway through a third as of now. There's a few weapons implemented along with a couple of unique lights for the player to use, and I have a basic monster AI that can be applied to any monster, with the option to expand on that behavior on a per monster basis. Active development started in April of this year, so things are still pretty early, but thanks to the aforementioned tools and starter project, there's already the beginnings of a playable game here with a couple levels that you could play now if I were to, for some reason, release this game right this minute. But you'd likely then notice the plethora of bugs and general lack of polish alongside those two playable levels, so I'm just gonna hang on to this for a little while longer. And that's the game. Well, for now at least. It's of course going to get a lot more meat on its bones over time. I do hope you enjoyed this introductory look at What Hides in Dreams. This video here is something of an experiment, in case you couldn't tell by the awkwardly spliced in ending that you're hearing now. For almost the entirety of my game dev pursuits up to this point, I've written monthly devlogs on my website, which, among other things, catalog my current progress on whatever I'm working on. That's worked out well for me personally for a while, since they're pretty easy to crank out in an afternoon, but I'm looking to change things up and maybe, hopefully, expand my audience a bit. After all, nobody actually likes reading. They'd rather put on a video and either watch something or use it as background noise. Sound off in the comments below, by the way, if you did use this as background noise. I won't judge. I'd probably do the same. This is all a long way of saying if you liked this video and would want to see more, then let me know by dropping likes and comments and that kind of thing. Same applies if you hate this, by the way. You're allowed to tell me that. You won't hurt my feelings. And with all that said, farewell.